Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So Blizzard announced had a very interesting blue post today, we'll say. We're going to go over it here today. You're probably going to see, if you subscribe to a bunch of different creators, especially in the Mythic Plus scene, titles probably along the lines of Blizzard saved Mythic Plus, which is why I put mine the way that it is, just try to be a little bit different. But this is the same video topic as a bunch of other creators have made, so probably not going to be a ton different from what others have done, but I'm going to be going over it as with my perspective on this, and I'm going to just kind of read the blue post in full and give some thoughts on some of the things that they sent in it, and then discuss the changes that they made today. They also did some Mythic dungeon tuning for Season 2 that I think really ties very closely to the things they talk about in this blue post, so we're not going to go in depth on the dungeon tuning changes, just because I don't participate much on PTR, so a lot of this stuff doesn't really mean anything to me. But it's good to see that they're doing the tuning and things like that they are. So let's go over this blue post, let's talk about these things, and then again, I'm going to interject with my own thoughts throughout this process. So, Season 2 Mythic Plus updates. Over the course of the War Within Season 1, the development team has received extensive feedback on Mythic dungeons, much of which has revolved around frustrations, especially in trying to progress through the system primarily in pickup groups. True. Common areas of criticism included the sense that players were faced with too many mechanics at once. Correct. That failure was too punishing. Correct. That rewards felt insufficient for the challenge and effort required. Correct. And that it could be hard for many players to find groups as the community gravitated towards meta specs to cope with these difficulties. I always love how Blizzard in these posts will always put meta in quotes, like they don't believe that it's true almost, and it's like, come on guys, you know better. It's funny to me. But correct. I've had instances where when I was trying to pug as a Brewmaster monk, I had people straight up like that have been sitting in queue waiting for a tank for like 20 minutes, decline me, and then whisper me that, hey, you're not a prop paladin. We want a prop paladin for our group. Like, bro, really? It's an 8. I was crest farming. Whatever. As we have already approached our Season 2 dungeon rollout on the PTR and ongoing tuning with an eye towards addressing mechanical issues. We have already approached our Season 2 dungeon rollout on the PTR and ongoing tuning with an eye towards addressing mechanical issues. Cast times on critical enemy spells have been significantly increased, tank damage spikes reduced in magnitude and or given better telegraphs, and the overall number of threats in an average pack of enemies has been reduced and more. We also made improvements towards rewards, especially reducing the penalty of failing to finish a dungeon within the timer during the Siren Isles content update, but we understood that there was still more to do in order to fully address the feedback we've been hearing. Now, as we approach our second season, we have a chance to make some broader changes to the structure of Mythic dungeon progression. It makes sense. Like, they weren't going to do anything big mid-season. Like, it just doesn't make sense. The 0.1, 0.2, 0.0 patches, those are the times where you want to make some very, like, foundational changes. Mid-season, you want to do things like aggressively tuned dungeons and aggressively tuned classes. Neither of which that they did this first season, by the way. Anyways, a factor that we see as an underlying cause of many of the cited issues is the lack of smooth and healthy difficulty/reward progression in the current system, and rewards are an essential part of that picture. I've debated like all season making a video about this, so let's just see what they say and see if the things that I've been thinking are the things that they've been thinking that they recognize. The introduction of Delves has significantly changed the endgame reward ecosystem. Okay, yes. Players who were accustomed to doing Mythic Plus in the past expansions may have geared up in Delves at the start of the War Within Season 1, and then looked at the M Plus reward track and found few or no rewards worth their time below the Mythic 7 level or so. That had two main effects. Before I talk about these two main effects, read these, I'm going to agree. You could get to 610 by doing the easiest content outside of leveling in the game. Like, Delves were piss easy once they fixed them to make it so that it was easier to do solo. Like, I had a number of people in my guild that did not touch a single dungeon once they hit level 80 until we hit raid. Like, because they just went into the Delves and just grinded Delves and geared through Delves because it was the most efficient way to gear. So yeah, I agree. All right, let's look at their two main effects that they claim here. Lots of players would enter the system at Mythic 7 since they didn't need more champion gear, and Mythic 7 was the first level to drop hero track items from each run. However, often these players frankly lack the dungeon experience required to succeed at that level. dealing with a 77% bonus to enemy health and damage on top of Challenger's Peril, making deaths more costly, was never designed to be an environment in which to learn mechanics for the first time, and yet many players ended up doing just that. This heavily impacted success rates, led to a sense of inconsistency from group to group, and made many players more wary and more selective in filling groups for their keys. Yes, 100%. There were people in my guild that did not want to do keys unless someone was going to carry them in a 7. And I've heard about this in many other guilds as well. Now, this wasn't broadly in my guild. A lot of people started in the +2, +3, +4 range and worked their way up. But there was a group of us that, like, we started doing keys very early. I love Mythic Plus. It's my favorite mode in the game. So I was in there pretty early trying to do keys and stuff like that. And when I got to the point where I was consistently doing like 6, 7 keys, there were people that were like, I'd like to come, and I'd look, and they hadn't been in a dungeon yet. Now, I'm not going to say no to a guildie because, you know, social issues that go with that, but I was basically having to play by play the entire dungeon. And I was doing that in pug groups too. Like, there are people that are like, hey, I've been in delves this whole time. What do these mobs in this dungeon do? And I'm like, dude, this is a +6, +7 key. Like, I need you to know what you're doing. You know, and so what was happening is that people stopped looking at your eye level, or they wanted your eye level to be inflated, because if you were listing like a +7 or a +8 key, they wanted you to be at a 618, 619, 620 item level at a time when there were not many people that were at that level, because they wanted, and they were looking at your Raider IO score. Now, they vastly overestimated what was needed. Like, you could have 500 score and be capable of doing a 7, but if you didn't have like almost 2k, you just weren't getting invited to groups. It made things like, it made DPS wait times enormously long. I watched a streamer friend of mine spend 2.5 hours sitting in Dornegal, chain signing up for keys. That was her stream. It was wild. All right. Meanwhile, keys in the 2 to 6 range had a shallow applicant pool, especially past the first weeks of the season. This meant that even players who tried to start at a lower difficulty level in order to build the experience to succeed at 7+ keys often had a hard time finding and forming groups, experiencing many of the same frustrations. That's still true now. Like, I sign up for like 4 to 7 keys on my Warlock that I'm trying to gear up, and I'm trying to get like all of the hero pieces to like 4 or 6, and you need the rune crest to do that. It's really hard to find groups in the 4 to 7 range. It's crazy. So, good to recognize some of the big pain points that I've also noticed and thought was a big issue. This first one, 100%. They really fucked up the gear scaling for season 1, and I don't think, and by the time they maybe even recognized it, they couldn't do anything about it. And so we just had to deal with this pain point for the entire season. It kind of sucked. And it made the season way less fun, and a lot of people have stopped playing or raid logging or something like that. And it's unfortunate because I love Mythic Plus. Like, the dungeon pool is the best. I don't think the dungeons were tuned all that well, but I still really enjoy the mode for the most part. And basically only getting like 4 people in my guild and then being forced to pug the rest that were playing on a consistent basis, like, made doing keys really hard this season. Alright, so let's talk about the changes they're making. Baseline Mythic, aka Mythic 0 dungeons, will now award champion track gear from each boss with a weekly instance lockout. Okay, so I actually okay with that. It was daily for a long time, and it was offering like high level veteran with some bosses doing like last bosses doing champion. I think it's been so long since I've done a 0, but each boss giving champion track gear from each boss, which you can get up to current track yield, would get you up to like, I think 610 is the top of champion, if I recall correctly. Or 6, might be 616 or something like that. It's in the 610 to 620 range. The health and damage of enemies in these dungeons has increased to reflect the improved rewards, while keeping Mythic 0 an accessible point of entry for players beginning their gearing journey in Season 2 or looking to learn dungeons in a lower stakes environment. Yeah, Mythic 0 does still have value if you have someone that's like brand new to the game and they want to learn dungeons, but they're a little wary of jumping right into keys. Like, getting a bunch of alts and going into a Mythic 0 is like a great way to be like, all right, here's some of the mechanics to look out for, And then once you start jumping into, you know, Mythic 2s, that's when you're like, all right, now you got to do all those things that we learned in Zeros, and now you got to do just everything faster in order to meet the timer. All right. From Mythic 2 through Mythic 10, each new level will now increase the health and damage of enemies by 7%, down from the previous 10. Per level scaling will remain at 10% from Mythic 11 and onwards. Okay, so they just flatly lowered the difficulty curve of 2 to 10 keys. That's really interesting. I really like that. I mean, I've read a lot of these changes already, so I'm not like first reaction. This is me basically talking my thought process out. So I really like this because it makes the gear scaling, it makes the margin for error a little bit bigger, and it makes the punishment for when errors occur less impactful. And it smooths out the first 10 levels of keys quite a bit, because like the difficulty curve that was happening is that you would jump into like a +2, +3 was like pretty simple, and then +4 would add Fortified or Tyrannical. And then for some reason, the jump to +5s without significant gear was like, felt pretty significant. And then 5s and 6s kind of felt really hard, and then 7s you would jump in, and there was a gear curve there now because every death is 15 seconds versus 10, and people were a little bit nervous and scared about that. And then 8s and 9s were your initial Gilded Crest, or now your Gilded Crest section, but initially it was just 9s. And then 10s, there'd be like this big jump, because now you have Fortified and Tyrannical. And then at 12, you were getting this extra damage and healing on every mob. So you got this other like big brick wall. Like you could tell in terms of the number of completed keys exactly where your walls were at. And it was at 4, 7, 10, and 12. It was crazy the way that the skill jumps needed in a lot of ways were just nuts. And well, I've never claimed to be like a super strong player. Like I struggled even to get over like the initial 7 hump to get into like 8s and 9s. And then still today, I'm kind of struggling to get all my portals and stuff like that. Part of that's because I ended up swapping characters twice this season for raid purposes, but like still struggling with that. And it just feels like I can 2-chest most 9s, and then I'm barely timing or not timing 10s at all. It is so weird, the difficulty jumps that happen. All right, the Xalatoth's bargained rotating affixes will move up from Mythic 2 to Mythic 4, leaving no affixes other than the existence of a timer at the 2 entry levels in the M+ system. I love this. So in Mythic 0, basically you're like, hey, here's what Mythic mechanics are. Mythic 2, Mythic 3, now it's like, okay, now you're doing those mechanics, except you have to do everything a little bit faster, and things hit just slightly harder. And then at Mythic 4, you're now adding this extra rotating affix that changes every week, adds a little bit of flavor to your dungeon, gives you something else to think about, and ideally you've practiced enough 2s and 3s so that some of that stuff is muscle memory, and now you can add this extra layer of depth to a dungeon system. I love that. The alternating cycle of Tyrannical and Fortified will move up from Mythic 4 to replace the Challenger's Peril affix at Mythic 7, with the other one continuing to take effect at Mythic 10. So now you have Xalatoth's bargain being from 4, 5, 6 keys, and now you're adding at 7, which is again a decent place for skill difficulty curve. But remember, you're only getting 7%. Now you're only up at Mythic 7, you're at 49% versus 70. I mean, that's a huge gap. You're talking 21% difference in damage and health of mobs. You know, now you're getting Tyrannical, which covers the majority of that, and Fortified, which does the same. And then you get your other big jump at 10, which is still the case now. And then at Mythic 12, instead of an additional 10% increase to enemy health, Xalatoth's Guile will now include increased timer penalty for deaths that was formerly part of Challenger's Peril, as a replacement for the rotating bargain affixes. While the mechanic can feel overly punishing for groups still learning and progressing towards gear rewards, a focus on clean execution remains appropriate for the upper echelons of the system, and removing the extra 10% stat should make the transition into the prestige tiers of the system feel like less of a wall. Okay, so they're basically taking out the extra, like the 12 affix now basically gives all mobs, like you lose the benefits of bargain, and all mobs just gain a flat 10% damage and HP increase, making like every key that was at 12 plus was basically the same, minus everything having a little bit more health and hitting a little bit harder. So there wasn't that variation week to week that the old affix system or even that bargain gives, which a lot of high key pushers really enjoyed. But also was like a very steep wall for like no freaking reason. It felt like in a lot of ways. So now they basically have made your skill curves a lot less punishing. So the jump from 0 to 2, less punishing. It's smoother. The jump from 3 to 4, less punishing because again, you're getting this reduced scaling. The jump from 6 to 7s is easier because all you're doing now is adding in tyrannical or fortified. The jump from 7 to 10s is also easier because you're still only losing 5 seconds per death during that time frame, and only you're adding in is the opposite tyrannical or fortified, while still dealing with your bargain affixes. And they've adjusted a lot of the bargain affixes over the course of the PTR. And then your jump from 11 to 12 is also much easier because there's not another damage jump. Because what was happening is that when you would jump from 11 to 12, you were getting 110% to 130%. You were basically jumping 2 key levels by jumping 1 key level. So now you're only getting, so you're at 99% when you go into, or you're at 100, you're at 10%, you're at 70%. Mythic 11 should then jump you to 80%. And then Mythic 12, you're at 90%. So what was basically Mythic 12s are now going to be basically the same difficulty that 9s and 10s were. So your difficulty curves have all been flattened out quite a bit. And it's going to allow people that were getting brick walled that were probably good enough in some respects to do like 12s and 13s, but were getting brick walled by a bunch of different other factors. It now smooths out that gear curve. So I really, really like that. The requirements to achieve some key reward tiers have been reduced, e.g. Hero Track gear is now available in the end of run chest from Mythic 6 dungeons, and Gilded Crests are available from Mythic 7 and up. Okay, so this is actually really good. Okay, and yeah, I don't have to do the math because I was already trying to do it. So they do the math for you. This is very, very cool. So what is basically the case now is that so right now in the current system, you get Hero Chat gear at the end of dungeon in Mythic 7s, where you get Challenger's Peril, and then Gilded Crest start at 8. They've dropped that 1 extra key level. So now you're going to get Hero Chat gear at end of dungeon and in your vault at Mythic 6. And then at 7, you're going to start off at 10 Gilded Crests. I'm assuming this is for timing a dungeon, where you get the 4th tier. You're still getting Hero Track gear at the end of dungeon, but you start getting your Gilded Crest, which allows you to complete the last 2 tracks of Hero. Because at Hero 5 and Hero 6, you have to have Gilded Crests in order to make those upgrades. Now you can farm 7s if you're a player that's, you know, not interested in going beyond that, but want to finish out like your Hero Track gear. You're now going to be able to do that with enough Gilded Crest runs at 7. And then you get your Myth Track still at 10, which I think is fair. I think that's appropriate, because if you're going to get Myth Track tier, it needs to be on content that is roughly the same level as Mythic Raid. Shoutouts to my guildmate for saying that, because I actually agree with that statement. I think that's how he said it. But you're also getting significantly more Gilded Crest. You're getting 16 to 20, and then it's going to be, I'm assuming, 20 from 12 up the entire way. All right. On balance, this version of the system should have a more rewarding point of entry, smoother progression, and overall lower difficulty than players experienced in Season 1. One additional note and of relevance to players in the upper end of the system, we are changing the rating requirement for the new Keystone Legend achievement, being added in Season 2, moving it from 2850 to 3000. This is being done to keep it at a comparable level of challenge and prestige after the changes to the overall scaling. We'll also be decoupling this achievement from the system that allows players to set a floor for their higher level keystones. Instead, once a player has finished all 8 seasonal dungeons at Mythic 12 within the timer, their keystone will no longer be de-leveled below 12. Once a player's dungeon timed at all 13, the new floor will be 13, and so on and so forth for all key levels above 12. So that's going to impact a very small percentage of the players, but that is an amazing olive branch to those players. One of the things that you hear high key players talk about all the time is that if they take like a week or 2 off and don't do any keys because life or whatever, they come back and they're down to like an 11, they have to do like almost like a completely different style of key, even though they've timed like 14s or 15s and whatever the case may be. And so now they're being extended an olive branch that says, hey, you've completed all 14s. That's your baseline key now. You don't have to do a bunch of what are generally dubbed homework keys. So I think that's a really, really cool olive branch to the players that sit at 12 or 13, you know, that go into that quote unquote prestige tier, as they call it. Something I've been trying to get into, but I've been walled at 10s this season because of all the issues around Mythic Plus this season, plus probably my own gameplay. So overall, Blizzard cooked, and they cooked well. I think these changes are fantastic. I'm already excited about the Season 2 dungeon pool. I'm a big fan of all the 3 dungeons they brought back in Workshop, Theater of Pain, and Motherlode. Floodgate, from what I understand from some of the people that have been playing extensively on PTR, is a pretty solid dungeon. Plus the other 4, like I said, they made a bunch of different changes to it now. My biggest concern in Dark Flame Cleft, they've made some changes to that, obviously, with these, but they also made it so that the visuals of the minecart event and everything after that is significantly easier to deal with. I haven't paid attention too much, but if they've changed the consecrations in the church floor of those paladins to not like almost one-shot melee DPS, even on heroic, then this dungeon to me has a chance to be one of the best dungeons of all time. So I'm really excited for the season. Really excited to see it. I've heard nothing but good things about the raid as well, with Operation Mother or whatever, Undermined. The raid for Undermined, like, I've heard really good things about the raid testing side of that. Like, a lot of people are very excited about the possibilities that these bosses are going to bring. It sounds like Season 2 is shaping up, based on some of the feedback that I've been hearing, to be significantly better than Season 1. And with these changes to Mythic Plus, they, I think, made all the right decisions. I obviously wish they would have made these sooner, but I also understand why they couldn't do it, because making this type of change in the middle of the season kind of destroys the competitiveness in the ladder and the title chasing folks. Makes things kind of unfair to them in that regard. And also is such a big fundamental change that you kind of screw over people that have been doing the system under the way. Like, I get why they took their time. I wish they would have done more aggressive dungeon tuning, more aggressive class tuning. But this system, if they had kind of took the feedback initially and done this with Season 1, I think you would see Season 1 be much more well received than what it has. It kind of had some timing issues and stuff like that. I'll probably do a whole moratorium on the season in another video, but I'm very, very excited for Season 2 already. I'm ready for it to be here. We're still, as of recording, there's no announced date, unless it's changed in like the last 20 minutes. But the common thought process is around late February 25th, or the first week of March. But I think February 25th, because that's when Turbulent Timeways ends. So it just is a natural stopping point to move into the next season. And so I can't wait for Season 2 to get here. I'm enjoying. My guild has made good prog in our Mythic raid. We're 4 of 8 Mythic, and working on getting consistent on that reclear. So we're just enjoying doing that as a group, and kind of prepping ourselves for the next season, getting our cohesiveness together and stuff like that. So we're excited to move into Season 2, I think, overall. And I'm excited to see what the season brings. And it helps that, you know, I'm back on my class that I enjoy the most in Monk, and I'm not dipping off of that. I've settled on characters that I want to play the rest of this expansion, which also makes me excited, because now I have like a better focus on gearing. So yeah, I'm just excited for Season 2, and these changes have made me even more fired up. So I love what you did, Blizzard. Thank you for making these changes. Thank you for announcing them. Thank you for putting a focus on Mythic Plus for what feels like the first time this expansion. And I'm very curious to try your content in Season 2. So that's it. Put your comments down below, like, share, subscribe. I'm on the road to a full 1,000 subscriber, or I'm on the road to 1,100, 1,200 subscribers, but would like to do more. I'm trying to be better about putting out more content. The first month of 2025 has been interesting, guys. All sorts of reasons why that is, but we'll leave that to another time. I'm going to try to be better about putting out more stuff. I'm in the process of planning my monk guides for 11.1. I'm starting to do the information gathering, determining the structure of how I want to do them. And I'm going to add Druid to the mix. I'm back on my Druid bullshit as well. Primarily playing, of course, Bear and Feral. Anyone that knows my Druid love for those two specs know that. But I'm also going to do a balance and a restoration guide. That's more of a point of entry, and that's all my guides are ever intended to be, or more point of entry with the new changes, and then encouraging people to experiment from there. In fact, the build that's in my beginner's guide, I don't use almost any of those builds anymore because I've found different things that work better for me. So even I don't follow my own guides strictly to the letter because they're not intended to be followed that way. They're meant to give you a foundation baseline of information to help you build what you need to get started, and then I encourage you to experiment and learn things on your own as well. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them down in the comments of this video. Go to the Monk Academy series, throw questions down in there. I still review those anytime I get comments. I get notified, and I will go in and answer those questions. And like I said, like, share, subscribe, share this video with your friends, guildmates, whatever, if it helps them kind of understand a little bit better the situation. So anyways, enough simping for clout. Have a good night. Stay safe. Hope you enjoy yourself. You're having fun. You keep on gaming. We'll see you next time.